It's one of the most famous occult trials in history, and it took place 100 years before the witch trials in Salem. In Europe during the 1500s, on top of having to deal with the Black Plague, men and a few women were convicted of transforming into werewolves and mutilating and eating adults and children. There is one case in Germany that stands out more than the others because of its brutality and the eventual gruesome execution of the alleged werewolf, Peter Stumpp. For months in Bedburg, Germany, something was slaughtering the goats and sheep at night and leaving the carnage for local farmers to wake up to. Their bodies were torn apart and their insides were now on the outside. Wolves were the obvious predator because they were prevalent in the area, but soon local children started to disappear from their homes and women would disappear as they walked from one place to another. Some of their bodies were also found mutilated along the road, if they were found at all. The victims had been strangled, disemboweled, bludgeoned, torn apart, and eaten. Some were even concerned that it was something more sinister, like a werewolf, something that could walk amongst the people in the town, unsuspected when in human form. The townspeople were understandably disgusted and terrified, so they formed patrols with mastiff-type dogs to hunt whoever or whatever was committing these horrible acts. But who exactly was Peter Stumpp, and what did he even have to do with werewolves? Peter Stumpp was a 50-year-old widower with 2 children, a boy and a girl. He was respected in his community because he was pleasant and was somewhat wealthy. There isn't much more known about Stumpp, but what is known, if true, is from a 16-page pamphlet by George Boers called The Damnable Life and Death of Stumpp Peter. It describes Stumpp's life, the crimes that he allegedly committed, his trial, and his execution. It also includes statements from neighbors and witnesses. The pamphlet was published in London in 1590 and later rediscovered in 1920 by English author Augustus Montague Summers. Summers reprinted the pamphlet and he added a woodcut in his book, The Werewolf. He also wrote The History of Witchcraft and Demonology in 1926, as well as books on vampires and werewolves. He also translated the Malleus Maleficarum from Latin into English. The Malleus Maleficarum was a book that taught witch hunters how to identify, interrogate, and convict witches. It was used during the Salem witch trials. In the 1500s, Germany was at the center of the witch trials in Europe, and this pamphlet was published during that time. It's claimed that Stumpp practiced black magic, and when he was 12, he made a pact with the devil, and the devil gave him a belt that allowed him to transform into a wolf with a mouth great and wide, with sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, mighty paws, and eyes that flashed like fire in the night. Whenever he put on this belt, he would turn into a werewolf. Once he took the belt off, it was as if he had never been changed. Another version of the story says that he didn't literally transform into a wolf, but that he would wear the skin of a wolf while looking for his next victim. The name Stumpp may have been given as a reference to the fact that his left hand had been cut off, leaving behind a stump. In Germanic mythology, which also influenced the laws of the time, it was believed that if a werewolf's left forepaw was cut off, the same injury would appear on the man. Once, as a local farmer was attempting to fight off a wolf, he cut off its left paw with a sword. When the farmer later ran into Peter Stumpp, he noticed that Stumpp was also missing his left hand. Now, this was enough to convince him that Stumpp and the wolf were one and the same, so a posse was formed. Stumpp was allegedly found while he was in wolf form and chased by the men and their large dogs. He went on to remove the wolfskin belt that the devil had given him, and he reverted back to human form. Once his identity was confirmed, he was arrested. He said that he tossed the belt into the woods, but the belt was never found. Once he was under the threat of torture, he began his truly disturbing confession. He confessed to murdering 16 people. He admitted to ripping out the fetuses of pregnant women and eating their hearts and strangling, beating, and tearing apart children. He claimed that he devoured some of his victims entirely so they would never be found. He even lured his own son into the woods and beat his head against a rock and later ate his brains. He admitted to stalking pretty girls in town and following them to more remote areas where he could do whatever evil things he wanted. He also admitted to sleeping with his teenage daughter Sybil, as well as a succubus. A succubus is a female demon that's believed to be sexual in nature, appearing to men in dreams or in the physical world to seduce them, steal their energy, and in some cases, kill them. But despite his wild confessions, there was some actual proof against him. One girl said that she was able to escape from a werewolf because the starched collar of her Sunday dress protected her neck from his claws. Another person said they saw Stumpp closely watching some children as they were playing and milking cows in the field right before they disappeared. Another man described a time in the woods when Stumpp lured him away from the woman that he was with by calling his name, only to quickly go back and snatch the woman away. On October the 28th, 1589, the 50-year-old farmer was found guilty of cannibalism, incest, witchcraft, and werewolfery, and he was sentenced to death. This was during a time when the punishments were sometimes just as gruesome as the crimes that were committed. In Bedburg, Germany, on October 31st of 1589, a large crowd gathered to witness his execution. Stumpp suffered pain that was indescribable during his execution, which is considered one of the most brutal on record, and this is why. First, as he was strapped to a breaking wheel, also called a Catherine wheel, his daughter's skin was stripped off and she was strangled. His flesh was also methodically ripped from his body with red-hot pincers that resemble pliers. First, the skin was removed from his torso, then his arms, and then his legs. His limbs were then broken and bashed repeatedly as he was strapped to the wheel with the blunt end of an axe so that he could not return from the grave. He was also decapitated. His head was attached to a wooden pole that was carved into the likeness of a wolf and later displayed as a warning to all sorcerers and witches, which unlawfully followed their own imagination to the utter ruin and destruction of their souls eternally. His female partner, Catherine, was also flayed alive and strangled as he screamed in pain. Sybil and Catherine were burned alive at the stake, and all three bodies were tossed onto the pyre and burned completely as a way to show what happened to anyone that chose to consort with a werewolf. Some historians believe it's possible that Stumpp was a murderer and that the werewolf legends may have been a way to explain the presence of serial killers in the 1500s. Many believe, especially those present at his execution, that he was an insatiable bloodsucker, psychologically damaged, and suffering from the rare mental disorder of what is now known as clinical lycanthropy. Supposedly, Stumpp actually claimed to have this condition. He believed that his pleasure in the shedding of blood and the feeling of fresh, warm blood pouring down his throat was due to the condition before it had a name. Clinical lycanthropy is when a person has the delusion that they can transform into, has transformed into, or is an animal, and often that animal is a wolf. Some believe that Stumpp was innocent and that his confession was incited by the horrific torture he endured. It's been suggested that he was never involved in incest and that it was simply town gossip that was spread by a romantic rival. But who really knows? Because we don't know if he really said any of those things because we don't have any of the records from the actual trial. Maybe Stumpp, who was a Protestant, was a victim of werewolf hysteria and the religious rivalry that was going on between the Catholics and the Protestants. His trial may have been a way to encourage any remaining Protestant to convert to Catholicism. Think about it. What Protestant would have wanted to be associated with an incestuous werewolf that made a pact with the devil and slept with succubi? Surely his trial and his execution would lead people to the Catholic Church.